Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the third of our Microsoft SharePoint month webinars, Do the Right Thing. My name is Will McLean and I'm joined here by Tony Hughes, our SharePoint Senior Specialist, who will take us through a live SharePoint scenario very shortly. As I said, this is the third in a series of events. We had two the previous Thursdays. This is the Do the Right Thing there you see on the 30th. And we have another two coming up to finish off. Some of you, those of you who've been with us for all five, will know that the fifth one, what's going to happen is Tony's actually going to build a SharePoint site from scratch. And we've asked for your suggestions if you'd like to see anything specific so that we can show how we create the sites and how they can be developed bespoke to your needs. So we've already had one suggestion in. You will have my email address from your registration on the webinar. So if you have any suggestions that you would like to see that are relevant to your business, do let me know and we'll make sure that they're counted for that final session. It could be whether you want to look at tender management or quality in process, or if you're just looking to create forms for holiday or travel and expenses from an HR perspective. So anything that you'd like to see, do let us know. You'll see the web address there for where our previous recordings are, and this is where the current recording and subsequent recordings will also be. So please feel free to share this to your colleagues or even get them to join in the next two if that's something you'll find relevant. That's pretty much enough from me. I'm going to pass on to Tony now, who will take us through everything. But like I say, any questions, any problems, use the chat boxes that you have and I'll sort you out. Otherwise, we're about 40-45 minutes in total with questions at the end. So do have some questions coming in. So like I say, enough for me. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll pass you over to Tony.
Thanks, Will. Good morning, everybody, from a rather wet and windy Newcastle on Tyne. Not the best of mornings. Today's webinar we've called Do the Right Thing, and basically what we're talking around here is forms and workflow. So what I want you to think about as we go through it is keep in mind the three I's we've thought about over the previous webinars. What issues do you have within your business around, currently using paper forms or old database systems, etc. Again, use your imagination. What I'm actually going to base today's webinar on is building a sort of health and safety incident / accident reporting type of form. Doesn't necessarily have to be that type of scenario in your business. Like Will mentioned earlier, we could be talking about things like HR processes, finance processes, etc., etc. And just think about generally how you want to try and improve the processes within your business. So workflow and forms. So hopefully what you'll see today is how we can improve the efficiency of a process using SharePoint, how we build in automation, how we can trigger actions and alerts, how we can capture cleaner information from end users. And once again, don't forget that email in our eyes is not a business process. So what do we actually mean by a form? A form is basically the interface for a user to input data into a SharePoint list. So the form is the electronic interface which a user can use, and we can control what data they put in using different types of form fields. And it's also what we use to edit data, which is also in a SharePoint list. So if somebody submits an initial form with data, then obviously we use a form where other users or their manager can update that data. And what do we mean by workflow? Well, we use workflows to automate the processing of data within a SharePoint list. So for instance, in simple terms, we use a workflow to send a holiday request for a manager to approve or reject. And the workflow can also be used to create emails and tasks, etc., etc. Or we can use workflows on documents in a document library to process maybe reviews, etc., which we covered last week in our control freaks. So, without further ado, again, we're doing all this using SharePoint Online as part of Office 365. One thing what I am going to use today is the Nintex Workflow add-in for SharePoint. The main reason for that is that it gives you an interface where you can actually visually lay out your workflow, and this really is more for your benefit, is to see what we understand and what we mean by a workflow. There are other methods of developing workflows using SharePoint Designer or .NET coding, but they don't really give you a visual indication of the workflow, which is why I'm going to use Nintex Workflow today. Okay, so what we'll do is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a SharePoint list to capture our accident form data. Once we've done that, we'll build a quick workflow so you can see how we can update fields and notify users to, maybe to process a form or do an action against a form, etc., etc. And then finally, if time allows, I'll show you how we can, in simple terms, export the data from the SharePoint list into Excel and use that for producing some management information or BI. One thing I will say at this point is that I'm by no means an expert on Excel, so you mightn't see a graph, but at least you can see the data, and you experts with Excel will understand how you can take that to produce charts. So, so the first thing we'll do is we'll build the SharePoint list, which will define the fields we want in our form, and then move on to the workflow. So again, all standard functionality we're going to use today, and what it'll do is, as I'm going through it, I'll talk about how we can enhance certain parts of the form, etc. So let's build our custom list, and we're just going to call it accidents stroke incident. Let's just get rid of my S's. We'll say a database. Sorry, Will's just told us I've spelled incident wrong. Incident. Oh yeah, I have, haven't I? Sorry. He's picky, Will, much more than Steve, and Stephen would have let us get away with that. Right, so we've got our accident or incident database. We've shown this in the past, but just for people who haven't been on the previous seminars, if I now was to come in here and say, right, I want add a new item to this accident or incident database, it's only going to ask me for a field called title. That's because what we're using is just a standard function in SharePoint, the custom list, and we use that as effect as the basis or the foundation for the database we want to create. So let's build some of the fields we want to incorporate. So we just go list settings, and a field in SharePoint is called a column. We can centralize fields within SharePoint, or we can use them in multiple forms. But what I'm going to do today is just create all the fields in effect within this incident database. So let's start off. In our form, we want the user to input the date of the incident, and we're going to present them with a date and time field. We're going to make it mandatory, and if we want here, we can see time. So I'll actually see a date and time on here. All right, so we want to create another one, and I'm going to call this my category. So here I'm going to give the user a choice. So this ensures we get clean data, so people can't type in sort of just random text or anything like that. So here I'm going to say, well, I want them to tell me whether it was a near miss, an accident or an incident. I'm just going to give the user a drop-down menu. I can give them a radio button if I want, or I can also give checkboxes if I want them to have the ability to select more than one value. But in this case, I just want one value. All right, I'm going to create another column, which I'm going to call subcategory. I'm going to give the user, again, a choice. Make it mandatory. I'm going to either say it was we'll say a trip, a fall, or we'll say if somebody was, or they were hit by an object. Now what we can do on these as well is that we can make them cascading if need be. So if we had a category of A, we can then make the subcategory just give 2 particular choices, or if we had a category of B, then it might give another 3 or 4 choices. That just requires a little bit of tweaking. Here we're just going to do them as separate, just for the time we've got. We're going to ask them where did it take place. So I'm going to, a location, again we're going to give them a choice there, make it mandatory, and we're going to say it was either on site, off site, and you would never do this on a live one, which is other, because a lot of people will just pick other. So okay, and then we'll say, right, tell me what happened, and here I'm going to give the user multiple lines of text. I'll make it mandatory. Okay, the next one I'm going to say person involved. Now what we can do here is use an actual person or group field. This means that because we know the physical sort of network user or the Office 365 user, then we can use that in workflows. So we'll make that mandatory, and we'll create another one. So were there any witnesses? I'm assuming I've spelled that right because Will hasn't told me otherwise. We'll make that mandatory as well. I'll say what was sustained. We'll say multiple lines of text again. Okay. We'll have treatment. If I spelled treatment wrong, yeah, so I put treatment. Treatment provided. Yeah. Okay. And just a couple more to do, so we'll say resultant, Will, or resultant? Resultant absence. So here I'm going to put a number in. I can also put descriptions on to say, you know, enter the days absent. We can specify minimums and maximums, etc. in there if need be. All right, and then what we'll have is we'll have a status column. So we'll just say incidents are either in a status of logged, under investigation, or we'll say closed. Okay, so down here now under our columns we can see all the different ones we've got in here. We can go back and change them, so you know we could go back and say, well, we want to add another location. So we can go in here and say, well, actually off-site, or maybe the person was working from home or something like that. Okay, so what we're doing here and what we've done is defined the fields we want the user to fill in when they fill in the accident or incident database form. These items as well, we can put versioning on them, so we can track what changes are made as we go through the process. Okay, so now if I go back to me, in fact I'll just make one more change as well, just a little bit easier, and we'll say launch forms in the dialog. Right, so now if I go back to my accident or incident database and say add new item, then in effect I'm presented with a form. So SharePoint will automatically generate a form based upon the SharePoint lists and the fields which we define. The order of the fields can be changed. So if we went again back into the list and into the list settings, down here we've got column ordering. So this is where we can number the fields from top to bottom. So title at the top, date, category, subcategory, etc., etc. Okay. And it is possible to customize the layout of the form. Some projects we've done, the forms have been much more complex than this. And what we can do is make the forms tabbed. So if we've got maybe 50 or 60 fields on a form, we might have tab 1, which is sort of general information. Tab 2 might be in investigation, outcome. Tab 3 could be corrective actions from the incident, etc., etc. And we can also permission those if need be. Okay, so let's just fill something in. So I'm just going to say accident form at the top, put a date in. So we'll say, well, let's say it happened today at 9 o'clock. What was the category? We'll say it was an accident. What was the subcategory? We'll say fall. Where did it take place? We can say on site. We can say what happened. We can say Will tripped in the kitchen. So who was the person involved? Now unfortunately Will hasn't got a login onto my system, so in fact I'll change that to say Andrew tripped in the kitchen, so who was involved? So we can say Andrew Wolf. Who was the witness? We can say Tony Hughes. What was sustained? So we can say bump on head. Treatment was provided. We put a plaster on it. Resultant absence. Andrew's a bit of a wimp, so we'll say no. We'll just leave that as it is, and then we can hit save. Okay, so the form we filled in has then submitted that data into the SharePoint list. Okay, so if we put another one in, so we'll use a different category this time. So if we just say this was an incident, we'll say it happened on the 28th at 11 o'clock. We'll say, just double check, we used accident last time, didn't we? Yeah, so this we'll just say was an incident, say hit by an object. Where did it happen? Off-site. What happened? We'll say Will threw a cup at Tony. So a person's involved was Tony, who was a witness to that. Cash saw him do it. What was sustained? Cut eye. Treatment provided was 3 stitches. Yeah, it was a good shot. So okay, and then we can log that. So all we're doing is in effect just logging data into our accident/incident database. Okay, now I'll use a workflow a little bit later on, but you know, someone could come into here and say, right, I'm going to edit that item, and it is now under investigation. Okay, So it's now status has changed from being logged to under investigation. Because we've got versioning enabled, we've got the ability to see who made what changes to what fields at particular times. So, excuse me, we've got that audit capability, that traceability in the background. Forms can also have attachments. So we could come along and say, I want to attach a file to this. So if we've got a photograph of the injury, but we'll use our good friend Anton Dubek for that. And we can have multiple attachments as well. So if anyone goes back and wants to have a look at that accident form, then you can click on it and you can see the picture of Anton Dubek or the particular injury. I won't explain why I've got photographs of Anton Dubek on me PC, but it's something to do with the TSG golf day. We'll leave it at that. Okay, so that data we're just logging it. We're using a form. We're inputting data into SharePoint. Like I mentioned previously, this could be all sorts of kinds of data. It could be a holiday request database. It could be a training database. It could be purchase order requests. It could be expenses, all sorts of things. Anything where it's a form-based type of process, then in most cases we can transfer that sort of process into a SharePoint environment. Okay. Sorry.
Actually, Tony, I'll just ask you a question here that's come in just whilst we're at this stage. You're logging these incidents in this form. Can users see, or is there a way of presenting users with a new item to log an incident without them actually seeing all the previous incidents and accidents logged?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what we can do is as part of a workflow, for instance, is we can change the permissions on an item when it's been submitted. So we might say, well, the only person or the only people who can see this incident record or any type of record might be the manager of that process, so in this case the health and safety manager, and who we defined as the person involved. Okay, so I don't want to see Will's absence records or Will's disciplinary records, whatever. So yes, we can permission items at an item level. As far as actually providing the user with an easy mechanism to launch one of these forms, I'm just going to switch into one of the human resources area, which we used previously on one of the previous webinars. Is that it can be as simple as just clicking a button. All right, so here I've got leave requests. So I just click on that and it just launches the form. Okay, that button could be on the home page of your SharePoint environment, but the data is actually submitted into another area, into a health and safety area or into a human resources area. So the actual end user experience, God, it sounds like somebody from Microsoft there, can be completely different to what we're looking at here. Here we're just using straight out of the box functionality, but we can build upon that. Okay, right. So just before we move on to looking at sort of the workflow element, I just want to have a look at how we can present the information in these SharePoint lists or databases in different ways. I think I mentioned earlier that a SharePoint list, or in an earlier webinar, consider it a bit like Excel on steroids. A lot of smaller organizations, their accident or incident database might just well be an Excel spreadsheet where people are just adding line after line after line of data. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but that data we can't really do a lot with. We can't workflow it, we can't notify people of new items easily. And if somebody's editing that Excel spreadsheet, really nobody else can edit it unless you're using workbook sharing or something like that. With a SharePoint list, in effect, access to the data is at a line level, so I can be editing this top entry while somebody else is editing this bottom entry, and multiple people can be submitting entries at the same time. because in effect we are putting it into a database type of environment. Okay. So what can we do? Well, we can come in here and say, well, actually, can you show me all of my accidents? And what we're doing is just filtering the data based upon any of the fields we've got in here. So I could come in and say, right, show me everything where Tony Hughes has been involved. And it might start to show a trend, is to say Tony's a bit accident prone, or Will's a whinger because he keeps submitting forms. So it does give us the ability to quickly analyse the data in different ways. Or we could say, and I've actually spelled plaster wrong on there as well. So, or again, we can go in and say, well, I want to look at a different status, things like that. So this is everything which is logged. Okay. Right. But we can also use that to create different views on the data. So when we have a SharePoint list, by default, you just get what's called the all items view here. Okay. But I can go in and say, well, actually, I want to view this data in a different way. So I can create a view and maybe say, right, the view name I want to be by status. I can control what columns I want to show on that view. So I might say, well, actually, I'm not interested in showing me what the status was. But what I want to do is I can sort the data in any way. So I can say, well, sort by status, and then maybe sort by date. I can put filters on. So, for instance, I might say, well, only show information where the status is equal to under investigation. So I can have a view which is, I'm not interested about what's logged, I'm not interested about, you know, what's complete, just what are my current sort of live forms or live records. That can also be things like where you can use things like me. All right, so I could say only show where person involved is equal to me. So I can just see what records relate to me on there. Okay, and I can do things like group by as well. So I might say, well, can we group them together by status? And I might also stick some totals on there and just say sum up the category. Oh, sorry, count the category. All right, so all of a sudden I'm looking at it like that. So where previously I had my all items view, I can look at it by status and say, well, here's everything which is logged, and I know there's only one. Here's everything which is under investigation. Okay, and if I go to one of these items and edit it and say, right, this is now under investigation, then the views just dynamically change. Okay, so you'll only see what categories you've got there. Okay, so that's the basic concept in SharePoint of using forms to capture information and then store that information in a database. Okay, so what we'll move on to now is, well, how do we create a workflow to automate the process around that? Yeah. So if I go to my database, and like I say, what I'm going to use here is Nintex Workflow. Like I say, we could use SharePoint Designer. We could use .NET coding if it's incredibly complex. So I've just got a question come in saying, can workflow be done with InfoPath? Yeah, you can create InfoPath workflows. So yes, that can be done. One thing I'll say about the Nintex suite, and we're going to show more Nintex functionality next week when we talk about the mobile aspect of it, is Nintex is a lot more than just workflow. When we start moving into wanting mobile applications, you start using Nintex a lot around that as well. Okay. Right, so let's create a workflow. And what we're doing is we're just going to base a workflow on this particular list. And I'm just going to create a couple. So this is the interface you get with Nintex. So green is the start and red is the end. And along the left-hand side, is where we have all the actions we can perform within the workflow. Okay. Um, there are a lot of actions inside the Nintex suite. Nintex still uses the standard SharePoint workflow engine, so as that engine is updated and modified by Microsoft, then that's reflected within the Nintex application. Sorry, I just need a quick drink of water there. I'll just flick through some of the actions you can do, because you might think that some of these are bonkers, but actually we use them quite a bit in certain organizations. There's a lot of integration actions available. This one at the top left here is probably more for the more technically minded people on today's webinar, but what we can actually do is call what are called web services. This allows us to integrate SharePoint with other applications. A web service is in effect a little, if you think of it as a bit of middleware where we can pass data from SharePoint to a web service, and that web service passes the information on to another application. It might not be a Microsoft application, it could be Sage, it could be Oracle, it could be SAP, things like that. But it allows us to start a process inside SharePoint and get all of the inbuilt forms capability, etc. But at a certain point we can say, right, we now need to put that into the ERP solution or put it into the CRM solution. We can do a lot around SharePoint items within a workflow. So here we've got things like check-in item, check-out item, which is used a lot around document management. So if a document is coming up for review, the workflow can automatically check that document out to the relevant person, or so that they can then take it on and edit the document, approve the document, etc., etc. Yeah. There's a lot of Office 365 entities in there as well. We can update items, and that's what I'm going to do in a minute and show you that. We've got logic and flow, so we can have conditions, so we can say if category equals accident, send to a particular person. If category equals near miss, send to another person. That sort of scenario. Yeah. We can do calculations. We can pause. Okay, so what we can do is if we've got things like a holiday approval, somebody submits it, we send an email to his manager saying, can you approve or reject this? And what we might do is pause the workflow for 5 days, which might be your SLA for holiday processing. And if he doesn't do anything, we can send him a reminder email, or we can copy in his manager and we can get Big Brother, etc., etc. Okay. There are certain social integration we can do. I'm a great lover of Twitter, but if you think of large organizations, they might want to authorize or approve any tweets before they go out. So what we can actually do is, in effect, create the tweet inside SharePoint, get it approved by the comms team or the marketing team, and then automatically push it out to that organization's Twitter account. So we're not having to open up that Twitter account to 3,000 people and start tweeting about, here's a picture of me at the weekend in the big market in Newcastle. That's normally Will.
Or Anton de Beek.
Oh, Anton de Beek, yeah. And then we can sort of create tasks, assign tasks, send emails to people, etc. And then we have various utilities. So we can do things like find the number of days between dates and things like that. Okay. But what I'm going to do to start off with, if I can remember what I was going to do, that's right, is I'm just going to do something simple, and I'm going to hopefully, where's my update gone? Let's see. All right, I'm just going to say, well, I want to update something on a list item. All right, so it's very drag and drop, and then we configure. All right, so what we're basically saying here is, all right, I want this workflow is going to run on my accident and incident database, and I'm going to update an item when it's created. So I'm going to say I want to update the current item. What do I want to update? I'm going to say I want to update the title of it. And then you can say what do you want to update it to. All right. Well, what I'm going to use here is I'm just going to say, right, well, I want the title of the item, which I've just previously been typing in, to be the person involved, the category, and the subcategory. Okay. So what we can do is say, right, we can use an advanced lookup. We can go to the current item, and I want to get the person involved. Okay. I then just want to put a space, and I want to go to the current item again, and I want to put in the category, and then I want to put in the subcategory, and then save it. Okay. So the next time I create an item, I'll type something into the title field, but once I submit it, the workflow will run and change that. Okay. The reason I just wanted to show you this is that to give the concept of that we can do things and change things within a workflow. Okay. This is a very simple example, but it might be that once an item is being closed as complete, we might update some notes in there to who it was closed by, you know, what actions were taken, etc., etc. So within the workflow, we can define the settings. So all I'm going to do in here is just say the name of the workflow is update title, right? And this is how do I want it to start, because we can have multiple workflows running on an item if need be. We might have one workflow which starts when a new item is created. Okay, so that might just be a general notification. Right. We then might have another workflow which starts when an item is modified. Right. So when somebody maybe logs an accident or an incident form, we might have a field on there which could be something like investigating officer. Now that investigating officer might only be entered after the form has been submitted by the Health and Safety Department. So there we could say, right, when an item is modified, run this workflow and send an email to whoever's defined as the investigating officer. Okay. So I'm just going to leave this as start manually at the moment. All right, I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to say, oops, sorry, publish. And it's just going away and it's just building the workflow in the background for me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry about the time this is taking. It's normally quicker than this. No. There we go. All right, so if we now close that. So if I go back to me incident database, I'll use the top one, which currently the title is accident form. If I go to workflows, and remember I'm starting this manually, but this could be automatic. I've got a new workflow available called update title. So all I'm going to do is just run that workflow. Okay. And then we might have to do a couple of F5s and just make sure that workflow is running. So it says it's completed. So fingers crossed, we go back here into there, and there we go. All right. I know it's put in a lot of this gubbins here, but it's basically saying Andrew Wolf accident fall. So that was just an example of how a workflow can run and update items within that. Okay. So I'm just going to create another one on here. All right. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use it just to assign a task to somebody. Okay. So if we say task, so I'm going to say assign a task. Okay, I'm going to configure it. Right. And I'm going to say, right, who do I want to assign the task to? Well, I'm just going to assign it to me, just because I'm logged in as me, and then you can see the task is being assigned. So I'm going to say, when this workflow runs, assign a task to Tony Hughes, but this could be assign a task to the current items investigating officer or something like that. What's the task title? And say, please review the, and again I can use the advanced lookup and say go to the current item and say get the category. Okay, the accident with, and then we'll say the person involved. Okay, I can put a description in this. Please take this on ASAP so we can get the insurance sorted. All right. We can put due dates in. What we would normally have on the form is a investigation to be completed by date or something like that. I'll just leave that blank at the moment. We can define what our task outcomes are. So we could say, well, it's either investigation or it's complete. Okay. We can do things like allow this item here called lazy approval. What this allows us to do is if we send an email to somebody saying, can you approve or reject this holiday request, if that person replies to the email just saying yes, then SharePoint will and the workflow will automatically in the background approve that request, but based upon that user's credentials. Okay, so if you've got people out and about a lot, lazy approval can be very, very useful, where they can just say yes, no, reject, approve, things like that. Yeah. All right. If an item becomes overdue, then we can control the email which goes to remind them that it's overdue. Okay. And then if we save that. So what I'm going to do now is basically say, well, when a new item is logged, assign a task to Tony Hughes, and then I've got to decide whether it's under investigation or whether it's complete. So what we would do on the settings on here is we can say create Tony a task. I want this to start when a new item is created. Save that, and we will then publish it. So it's taken a while again. Just whilst that's doing that, and we can normally guarantee now I start talking, it'll say published. Is if you go onto the internet and search for Nintex on YouTube, there's a lot of videos on there about creating workflows and also some examples of the more sophisticated workflows which can be done. But you can do the same if you go onto YouTube and search for SharePoint designer workflows or InfoPath workflows. There's a lot of information on there you can refer to and maybe get ideas and thoughts from. Yeah. Right, so in my workflow tasks at the moment, I haven't got any. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put something into here. So I'll just say a test. The date that occurred on the 22nd. We'll fly through this. We'll see it's an accident. It was a fall. It was at home. We'll just say it was Tony. It was a witness. Was Cash. what was sustained, cut knee, treatment provided, I'll spell it right this time, plaster, resultant absence 45 days, and save. Okay, so that's gone in there. Right. If we look at our workflows on the item, then fingers crossed we will have, or we should have. There we go, create Tony a task, the workflow has started. Right, because this is the first time the workflow is run, sometimes it takes a few minutes to actually complete. So what we can do is check our workflow tasks a minute, and then I should get a task appear in here. There you go. So please review the accident with Tony Hughes, and it's assigned to Tony Hughes. That would be supplemented by email notification as well. This is done automatically when we're using a workflow task. So if I had my email open now, which I'm not going to do for obvious reasons, I'd get an email come through, but we can then come in and we can view the task. Okay, if I say I want to edit it, then here are my outcomes. Do I want to mark it as being under investigation? Do I want to be marketed as complete, etc., etc.? Okay, and then that task is then completed. Yeah. So that's just been a very, very high-level overview of SharePoint forms, associated workflows, etc. Just as the last thing I want to do today, this data is fine in here, but what we can do, and this is just a standard SharePoint function, is we can say, well, this list, can you export it to Excel? Okay, and it'll export it to Excel. Right. What that isn't is just a static drop of the data from SharePoint into this Excel spreadsheet. It's created a dynamic link between the two. Okay, so if I was to go back into here, and I'll just delete one of these items. So now I've only got 2 in there, and I refresh my data inside Excel, then I've only got 2 in there now. If I save that Excel spreadsheet either into SharePoint as a, our accident report with filters on it, etc., etc., every time I open that, we can configure it inside the data connections to actually say refresh data when opening the file. Okay, so once we've set up a report based upon a SharePoint list and exported that into Excel, then that is in a dynamic report. So every time we open that up, then it will update all the relevant charts, pivot tables, etc., etc. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Tony. We'll cover some questions now. So we answered a couple already. I have a couple to ask. So if you do have any more questions, please use the question or chat box on your right. But otherwise, I think that was a very useful insight into creating workflows and forms on SharePoint, some of the stuff even I could do, as well as an interesting insight to what sort of TV Tony watches on a Saturday night. Well, I think in the interest of consumer rights, there are other celebrity dance competitions available. So we'll cover the first question I've got here, Tony. Is it possible to migrate an existing Access database into SharePoint easily? I mean, we saw some good links there with Excel there, but is it easy to migrate that into SharePoint, the existing data, form fields, relationships?
Yeah, I mean it's something we've done in the past. The time taken to do it is obviously dependent upon how sophisticated the Access database is. If they're fairly straightforward, then we can export or link the information into Excel and then import that into SharePoint. There is the option to actually within Access is to link the Access database to a SharePoint list, and then it will bring across all the views, all the tables, all the reports, etc.
Okay.
So yeah.
Excellent. Is the tab feature in the forms, is that a third-party tool?
It is, yes. Yeah. There's a number of options. The one which we would ordinarily use is an application called Dynamic Forms for SharePoint, and that is a very, very low-cost solution. It's a one-off license fee for your server farm, and I think it's about £150. And it's very easy to use as well. We have a lot of users who use it on there, with a little bit of training.
Okay.
So.
And I think someone here testing on your graphical knowledge now. I mean, we saw how you could get the results on Excel, but is there a way through SharePoint to present results graphically?
With SharePoint Online, yes, because you can use sort of Power View, Power Pivot, things like that, or we can use embedded SQL Server reporting services charts into SharePoint, which is what we do within TSG, to be honest.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a number of options. You can actually buy, I suppose whilst we're on here, if I just do SharePoint charts, there's various charts. I'm just trying to find the one which is never on. There we go. So you can buy little plugins where you can connect your SharePoint list data to different chart types. You can control the colors of them, etc., inside there as well.
Excellent. Right, well, that actually covers all of the questions that we've been asked. Thank you again, Tony, for that. Just a reminder then that this webinar has been recorded, and you'll all receive an email from myself with a link to the recording. So if you missed anything or wish to share it with colleagues, you can point them in the right direction of that. We obviously have another two to come. Next week's being Wherever I Lay My Hat, which will be looking at the mobility of SharePoint and the functionality of being able to have users on the road accessing the same information excuse me, at the same time. And then the fifth and final webinar of our SharePoint month series is There's a Hole in My Bucket. Like I said at the beginning, we will be building the site, building a SharePoint site from scratch. So if you have any specific requirements, any needs for looking at a SharePoint site that are relevant to your business, by all means, please do email me with suggestions. Like I say, we've already had one, and that's going to be looking a bit at tender management processes. But if there's one that you'd like to see specifically, now's the opportunity, and we can really make sure that what we're doing is relevant to you. Other than that, I think we're all done. Tony, happy?
Thank you very much. Yep.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your attendance. Any questions, any feedback, any problems, you all have my contact details, and I can put you in touch with the relevant people. Otherwise, I hope you found today useful, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you at next week's webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.